In the gilded halls of the celestial spire, a palace carved from living moonstone that shimmered like frozen starlight, Corvin stood stiffly beside the arched balcony doors, his human frame dwarfed by the towering violet banners of House Varellis. He wore the ceremonial uniform of the royal guard, polished obsidian plates over deep blue fabric, silver insignias gleaming at his shoulders, and a plasma blade sheathed at his hip, though he'd never once drawn it in anger. Corvin was, by all accounts, the quietest guard in the palace, the one who spoke only when spoken to, who polished boots in silence, who once spent 3 days reorganizing the armory by alloy composition simply because no one had asked him to. He liked order. He liked quiet. Most of all, he liked not being noticed. Unfortunately for him, Princess Zarissa Varellis had noticed him. She stood now at the balcony's edge, silhouetted against the twin suns sinking over the crystalline dunes of Xylos Prime. Her skin shimmered the green of desert jade, smooth and luminous, and her long white hair, so pale it caught the sky's last blush, cascaded over one shoulder like liquid moonlight. She wore no crown, only a circlet of woven star metal that pulsed faintly with her heartbeat. Zarissa was ancient by human reckoning, over 200 cycles. But age had only sharpened her grace, her wit, and the quiet sorrow that clung to her like perfume. She turned suddenly, her golden eyes locking onto Corvin with an intensity that made his stomach drop like a stone tossed into a well. "I haven't made it in years," she said, voice low but clear, cutting through the stillness like a blade through silk. Corvin choked, not on air, on his own tongue, perhaps, or the sudden dryness in his throat. His face flamed crimson, and he nearly dropped the ceremonial lance he was supposed to be holding upright. He coughed, straightened, and tried to look anywhere but at her. The marble floor? Too reflective. The ceiling vines? They were watching too. He settled for staring at a distant fresco depicting the War of the Twin Moons, though he could still feel her gaze boring into his spine. Princess Zarissa stepped closer, bare feet silent on the polished floor. She stopped just within arm's reach, close enough that he could smell the desert blossom oil in her hair, close enough that he could count the flecks of amber in her irises. "You heard me, didn't you, Corvin?" she asked, tilting her head. He swallowed hard. I did, Your Radiance." "Then why do you look as though I've asked you to wrestle a sand drake barehanded?" She smiled then, a slow, knowing curve of her lips that crinkled the corners of her eyes. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. But it was dangerous, like standing too close to a live energy core. Corvin finally risked a glance at her. Because I'm just a guard, Your Radiance. A human, from the outer rim colonies. I fix plasma conduits when they spark. I stand still for hours. I don't even know how to dance properly." Zarissa laughed, a rich, warm sound that echoed softly through the chamber. "Oh, Corvin, you think mating is about dancing?" Before he could stammer a reply, the palace alarms blared. Not the soft chime of diplomatic arrival, not the hum of routine maintenance. This was the deep, resonant wail of breach protocol. Red emergency glyphs flared to life along the walls, and the floor beneath them vibrated as the palace defenses engaged. Zarissa's expression hardened in an instant. All playfulness vanished, replaced by the steel of a warrior princess who had led fleets into nebulous storms and commanded armies across dying stars. "Stay behind me," she snapped, already striding toward the armory alcove hidden behind a tapestry of her ancestors. "But, Your Radiance, protocol says I'm to." "Protocol can burn," she called over her shoulder, emerging with twin pulse daggers strapped to her thighs and a short-barreled ion rifle slung across her back. "The obsidian hand has breached the western gate. They're after the Heartstone." Corvin's blood ran cold. The obsidian hand, a rogue faction of exiled nobles who believed the royal bloodline had grown weak, contaminated by lesser species like humans. And they hated Corvin most of all. Not because he was powerful, but because he'd been permitted into the inner sanctum. Because he'd once bandaged Zarissa's wrist after a training mishap. Because he'd been seen sharing tea with her during the Festival of Veils. He unslung his own rifle, checked the charge, and fell into step half a pace behind her. Close enough to intercept an attack, far enough not to crowd her. They moved through the palace like shadows, weaving past flickering hollow statues and corridors lined with bioluminescent flora. Distant explosions rattled the foundations. Shouts echoed. The scent of ozone and burnt synthwood filled the air. At the Grand Hall's entrance, they found chaos. 3 royal guards lay unconscious, their armor scorched. A dozen obsidian hand operatives, clad in matte black exosuits, faces hidden behind respirator masks, were attempting to pry open the vault beneath the throne dais. The Heartstone pulsed within, a living crystal that powered the palace and bound the royal lineage to the planet's core. If stolen, Xylos Prime would go dark within hours. Millions would die. Zoraisa didn't hesitate. She fired 3 precise shots, each finding a joint in an enemy's armor, and then leapt into the fray, daggers flashing. Corvin followed, not with her lethal grace, but with grit and precision. He wasn't a duelist. He was a mechanic who'd learned to fight in alleyways during the Rim uprisings. He used cover, used angles, used the palace's own architecture against the intruders. He jammed an enemy's rifle with a sonic grenade, kicked another into a support column, and, when one lunged at Zoraisa from behind, threw his own blade straight into the attacker's shoulder. The fight was brutal, fast, and messy, but within minutes, only 2 hand operatives remained. One pinned under a collapsed chandelier, the other retreating toward the balcony. Zoraisa advanced on the pinned one, her breath coming fast, her white hair streaked with soot. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The operative spat black fluid, some kind of neural toxin, onto the floor. "You're already dead, half-breed. Your line ends tonight." Before Zoraisa could react, the operative activated a wrist detonator. Corvin didn't think. He tackled her sideways, shielding her body with his own as the explosion ripped through the hall. Heat seared his back. Shrapnel bit into his shoulder. He grunted, rolling them both behind a fallen statue as debris rained down. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and Zoraisa's ragged breathing. She pushed herself up, hands trembling as she checked him. "Corvin, are you hurt?" "Just singed," he muttered, wincing as he sat up. His uniform was torn, his skin raw in places, but nothing vital was hit. "You?" She stared at him, golden eyes wide. Not with fear, not with anger, with something softer, something like awe. "You saved my life." "I'm your guard," he said simply, as if that explained everything. But she shook her head. "No, you're more than that. You've always been more." She reached out, her fingers brushing a piece of rubble from his hair. The touch sent a shiver through him, though the palace was still sweltering from the blast. He wanted to pull away. He wanted to lean into it. He did neither, frozen between instinct and longing. Later, after medics had patched them both, after the Heartstone had been secured and the surviving hand operatives imprisoned, Corvin found himself alone with Zoraisa in the Moon Petal Garden, a quiet sanctuary atop the palace where bioluminescent flowers bloomed only under starlight. The twin moons of Xylos Prime hung low in the sky, bathing everything in silver-blue light. She sat on a stone bench, her injuries freshly bandaged, her white hair loose down her back. She looked tired, vulnerable, beautiful. "You never answered me," she said softly. Corvin stopped a few paces away, hands clasped behind his back like a soldier at attention. About mating." She glanced at him, a ghost of her earlier smile returning. "I haven't done it in 73 cycles. Not since my betrothed was lost in the Kalar expanse. I thought I'd never feel interest again. Not until you started flinching every time I walked past you." He opened his mouth, closed it. "I don't flinch. You do, like a startled flitmouse." He sighed, finally stepping closer. "Princess, Zoraisa, I'm just a man, from a dead world. My family died in the resource wars. I joined the Guard Corps because it was the only thing left that made sense. I'm not noble. I'm not even particularly brave. I just do my job. And yet," she said, rising to face him, "you stood between me and a bomb. You've stayed late to repair the palace's heating units so the nursery wouldn't freeze. You once spent 2 nights awake making a toy hovercraft for my niece when hers broke. You see people, not titles, not bloodlines, just people." Corvin looked down at his hands. Calloused, scarred, human. "Maybe, but that doesn't make me worthy of you. Worth isn't measured in lineage or battle honors," she said, stepping so close their robes brushed. "It's measured in kindness, in quiet courage, in showing up, day after day, even when no one notices." He finally met her eyes. "What if I'm not what you think I am? What if I am?" she countered gently. "What if I'm just a lonely princess who's tired of ceremonies and politics and pretending she doesn't want someone to share her tea with? Someone who laughs at her terrible jokes? Someone who doesn't care that her skin is green or that she's older than his entire species' written history?" Corvin felt something crack open inside his chest. a wall he hadn't even known he'd built. He thought of the years spent drifting from station to station, never staying long enough to belong. He thought of the first time he'd seen her, standing in the throne room with sunlight haloing her white hair, and how he'd thought, she looks like home, even though he'd never had one. I'd be terrified, he admitted quietly, of failing you, of not being enough. She placed a hand on his chest, right over his heartbeat. Then be terrified with me. Before he could respond, the sky above them split open, not with violence but with light. A massive starship descended silently, its hull shimmering with royal sigils. It wasn't an enemy. It was the Dawn Chariot, Zoraissa's personal vessel, returning from the outer colonies. The council arrives early, she murmured, frowning. They weren't due for another week. Corvin tensed. The royal council, elders of the noble houses, traditionalists who had never approved of human integration, let alone a human guard spending so much time near the princess. Rumors had been swirling for months, whispers of impropriety, of weakening the bloodline. Zoraissa turned to him, her expression resolute. Whatever they say, Corvin, remember this. You are seen, you are valued, and you are not alone. He nodded, though dread pooled in his gut. He'd faced bombs and blades, but the cold judgment of aristocrats? That was a different kind of war. The next morning, the grand hall was packed. Dignitaries from a dozen star systems filled the galleries, their robes and armor glittering under the ceiling crystals. At the far end, seated on the obsidian throne, sat Zoraissa, regal, composed, her green skin glowing faintly with ceremonial luminescence. Her white hair was braided with star metal threads, and her eyes scanned the crowd until they found Corvin standing at attention near the eastern pillar. He wore his full dress uniform, every metal polished, every strap perfect. But his hands were clenched behind his back, knuckles white. High Elder Vorik, a gaunt figure with skin like dried bark and eyes like flint, stepped forward. Your Radiance, he intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber. We have received troubling reports. Concerns regarding attachments formed within the palace walls. Zoraissa arched a brow. Attachments? A human guard? Vorik continued, turning to point a bony finger at Corvin. Corvin of Thesha. He has been granted access far beyond his station. He walks with you unchaperoned. He dines in your private quarters. He saved my life. Zoraissa cut in, rising from the throne. And the Heartstone, while you were debating tax reforms on your pleasure moons. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vorik's face darkened. Sentimentality is a flaw in a ruler, princess. The people need strength, purity, not distractions. Zoraissa descended the dais, her steps deliberate, echoing like drumbeats. She stopped before Vorik, close enough that her presence seemed to dim his aura. You speak of purity as if it's a shield, but purity without compassion is just emptiness. Corvin may be human, but his loyalty is deeper than any blood oath you've ever sworn. He doesn't serve me because of my title. He serves because it's right. She turned then, sweeping her gaze over the entire assembly. And if you think I will discard him like a worn glove because he lacks your precious lineage, then you do not know me at all. Silence fell thick and heavy. Then, from the back of the hall, a voice called out, clear and bright. All hail Princess Zoraissa and her chosen guard. It was Lady Myra, Zoraissa's younger cousin, known for her sharp tongue and sharper mind. Others murmured agreement. A few even clapped. Vorik looked furious but said nothing. Zoraissa returned to her throne, but before she sat, she caught Corvin's eye and gave the tiniest nod, the kind only he would recognize. It meant I've got you. That night, Corvin couldn't sleep. He wandered the palace corridors, his mind racing. He passed the armory, the meditation chambers, the old war memorial where names of fallen soldiers were etched in light. He didn't realize where his feet were taking him until he stood before the royal observatory. A domed chamber open to the stars, where Zoraissa often came to think. She was there, leaning against the railing, wrapped in a simple robe, her white hair loose again. She didn't turn as he approached, but she smiled. Couldn't sleep either? No, he admitted, stopping beside her. Too much, everything. She chuckled softly. I know. My mind's racing like a skyhound on stim pellets. They stood in silence for a while, watching the constellations swirl above. Xylo's prime skies were famously clear, and tonight the nebulae painted streaks of violet and gold across the black. Do you ever regret staying? She asked suddenly. Corvin blinked. Staying? Here. With us. You could have left after your tour ended. Gone to Novaterra or the Free Colonies. Started fresh. He thought about it. I thought about it. But this place felt like it needed me. And maybe I needed it too. She turned to face him fully now. What if I asked you to stay forever? His breath hitched. As your guard. As my consort. The word hung in the air like a struck bell. Corvin's heart hammered against his ribs. Zoraisa. That's not just a title. That's a bond. A life. I know, she said softly. And I wouldn't ask if I didn't mean it. You've shown me that tenderness isn't weakness. That quiet strength matters more than roaring pride. I want to build something with you, Corvin. Not just a political alliance. A home. He looked into her eyes, golden, ancient, full of hope, and saw not a princess, but a woman who had spent centuries waiting to be truly seen. And he, a man who had spent his whole life trying not to be seen at all, suddenly wanted nothing more than to stand beside her, visible, unafraid. I'd be honored, he whispered. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool and sure against his. Good, because I'm tired of drinking tea alone. Before he could reply, the palace alarms blared again. But this time it wasn't an attack. It was a planetary alert. A massive solar flare was heading toward Xylos Prime, one strong enough to fry unshielded systems across the hemisphere. The Heartstone's resonance would protect the palace. But the outer cities? The desert towns? The refugee camps near the crystal dunes? Zoraisa's expression shifted instantly from tender to tactical. We have 6 hours before the worst hits. We need to evacuate the lowlands, reinforce the shield grids, and get medical teams ready. Corvin nodded. The moment of intimacy shelved but not forgotten. I'll rally the guard detachments. And the engineering corps, they can reroute auxiliary power to the civilian shelters. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. Meet me in the war room in 10. As they turned to leave, Corvin glanced back at the stars. The flare would pass. The council would still grumble. The universe would keep throwing chaos at them. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was weathering it alone. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the duty and the weight of history, a small, stubborn spark of hope flickered to life. Green as jade, white as moonlight, and brighter than any star. The war room pulsed with urgency. Holographic maps swirled above the central table, showing evacuation routes snaking through the crystalline dunes. Shield nodes blinking red as they struggled to stabilize. Officers barked orders. Data streams scrolled across floating screens, and the air smelled of ozone and sweat. Corvin moved swiftly through the chaos, coordinating with engineering captains and dispatching guard squads to vulnerable sectors. He wasn't a noble. He wasn't even an officer by Xylosian standards. But in crisis, titles mattered less than who could act. And Corvin had spent years learning every conduit, every backup generator, every weak seam in the palace's infrastructure. Zoraisa stood at the command dais, issuing orders with calm precision, her white hair tied back in a severe knot, her green skin illuminated by the cold glow of emergency lights. She caught Corvin's eye as he relayed a power reroute plan to a flustered junior technician. A flicker of relief passed between them, silent but certain. Then the doors hissed open. Not palace guards, not medics, not engineers. A squad of Obsidian Hand survivors, those who'd escaped the earlier raid, marched in, flanked by 2 figures Corvin didn't recognize. Tall, crimson-skinned aliens with obsidian eyes and ceremonial armor etched with the sigil of the Kalar Expanse. Zoraisa's breath caught. The Vorthax, she whispered, half to herself. They're supposed to be extinct. The lead Vorthax stepped forward, his voice like grinding stone. Princess Zoraisa Varelis, your bloodline is forfeit. The Heartstone will be reclaimed, not by rebels, but by its true heirs. Corvin's stomach dropped. The Vorthax were ancient rivals of House Varelis, believed wiped out centuries ago during the Sundering Wars. If they'd returned, and allied with the Obsidian Hand, this wasn't just an attack. It was a coup. Before anyone could react, the Vorthax raised a hand, and the palace lights flickered, then died. Not just dimmed, died. The holograms vanished. The climate control stopped. Even the bioluminescent vines along the walls went dark. They've disrupted the Heartstone's resonance, Zoraisa said, her voice tight. Not destroyed, suppressed. Someone inside helped them. Corvin's mind raced. Only a handful of people had access to the Heartstone's harmonic dampeners. Royal blood, senior engineers, and The palace archivist Lyral, an elderly Xylosian who'd served 3 generations. And Lyral had been acting strangely the past week. Nervous, withdrawn, always lingering near the western conduits. Lyral, Corvin said aloud. He's been feeding them intel. Zoraissa's eyes hardened. Then we cut the head off the snake. But the Vorthax were already moving. Energy nets shot from their gauntlets, ensnaring 2 officers. 1 guard fired, only for his plasma bolt to fizzle against an invisible barrier. The Vorthax weren't just warriors. They wield resonance tech, capable of bending energy fields to their will. Zoraissa drew her daggers. Corvin, get to the Heartstone vault. Bypass the main conduit. Use the old maintenance tunnel behind the nursery. I'll hold them. You can't fight them alone. I don't have to win, she said, flashing him that same fierce smile from the balcony. I just have to buy you time. He wanted to argue, to stay, but he knew she was right. The Heartstone was the planet's lifeline. Without it, the solar flare wouldn't just knock out power, it would scorch the surface clean. He turned and ran. The palace corridors were now pitch black save for the dim emergency pathlights flickering erratically. Corvin sprinted past toppled statues and abandoned carts, his boots echoing off marble. He passed a nursery wing, empty, thanked the stars, and slid open a hidden panel behind a mural of the first bloom. The tunnel beyond was narrow, damp, and lined with ancient wiring that hummed faintly. Halfway down he heard voices, Lyral and a Vorthax commander. The suppression field is stable, Lyral was saying, voice trembling. But Zoraissa's guard Corvin, he knows the tunnels. If he reaches the vault, he won't, the Vorthax growled. The tunnel is rigged. 1 wrong step and he'll be ash. Corvin froze. Rigged. He scanned the floor. No visible tripwires. But the air smelled faintly of ionized dust, signature of proximity mines. He pulled a multi-tool from his belt, activated its passive scanner, and held his breath. 3 pulses. 3 mines, each buried just beneath the surface, tuned to humanoid biosignatures. Carefully, he stepped off the path, balancing on a narrow ledge along the wall. 1 misstep and he'd trigger them all. Sweat dripped down his temple. His shoulder still ached from the earlier blast, his hands shook, but his mind was clear. He'd rewired live reactors in 0 gravity. He could walk a mine-laced tunnel. He made it. At the tunnel's end, the Heartstone vault loomed, a circular chamber bathed in soft green light. The Heartstone itself hovered in the center, a pulsing crystal the size of a human torso, veins of gold and amethyst spiraling through its core. But around it, a lattice of black filaments pulsed with sickly red light, the Vorthax suppression field. Corvin approached cautiously. Touching the field directly would fry his nervous system. But the field had to be anchored somewhere. He traced the filaments back to a control node embedded in the wall, a hybrid device, part Xylosian, part Vorthax. Lyral must have installed it during a routine cleaning. Corvin set to work. He didn't understand Vorthax tech, but he understood resonance. And he knew the Heartstone's natural frequency. It matched the lullaby Zoraissa used to hum to her niece. He'd heard it once, by accident, while fixing a vent near the royal quarters. It had stuck in his head ever since. He recalibrated the node, feeding in the lullaby's harmonic sequence via his multi-tools audio emulator. The device whined in protest. Sparks flew. The red filaments flickered. Then crack. The suppression field collapsed. The Heartstone flared, its light surging through the palace like a tidal wave of energy. Lights blazed back on. Alarms reset. Shield grids roared to life across the planet. Corvin sagged against the wall, breathing hard. But his relief was short-lived. A voice echoed from the tunnel behind him. Impressive. For a human. Lyral stood there, holding a plasma pistol, his face twisted with shame and fury. I didn't want to do this. But the Vorthax promised to restore the old ways. No humans. No hybrids. Just pure Xylosian rule. You betrayed your home, Corvin said quietly. I saved it, Lyral snapped. You don't belong here. None of your kind do. He raised the pistol. Corvin had no weapon, no cover, no time. But then, a blur of green and white shot past him. Zoraissa. She slammed into Lyral with the force of a sandstorm, knocking the pistol aside. They grappled, the old archivist surprisingly strong, but Zoraissa was faster. With a final twist, she disarmed him and pinned him to the floor. Lyral, she said, voice heavy with grief. You taught me to read star charts when I was 5. You held my hand at my mother's funeral. And this is how you repay our house. Tears streamed down Liryl's face. I thought I was doing right. You were afraid, she said softly. And fear makes fools of us all. She signaled for guards, who arrived moments later to take Liryl into custody. Then she turned to Corvin, her golden eyes searching his. You did it. He did more than that, a new voice said. From the vault entrance stepped High Elder Vorik, alive, unharmed, and holding a data slate. Behind him stood a dozen council members, all watching Corvin with something like awe. Vorik approached, uncharacteristically solemn. We intercepted Vorthak's transmissions. They planned to trigger a planetary core collapse once the Heartstone was theirs. Millions would have died. You stopped it. Corvin blinked. I just fixed a machine. No, Zarisa said, stepping beside him. You saved a world. Vorik bowed just slightly, but it was enough. The Royal Council formally recognizes Corvin of Thessia as Kael'Vira, Shield of the Line, a title not granted to an outsider in over 4 centuries. Corvin's throat tightened. He'd expected exile, suspicion, not honor. But before he could respond, the palace shook. Not from an explosion, from above. The solar flare had arrived. Through the vault's transparent dome, the sky turned white gold, a river of fire cascading over the atmosphere. But the shield held. The Heartstone's light pulsed stronger, forming a shimmering barrier that absorbed the storm's fury. In the silence that followed, Zarisa took Corvin's hand again. Not for show, not for politics, just because she wanted to. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something new began to grow. But the twists weren't over. Days later, as Xylos Prime recovered, a distress signal crackled through the royal comms, originating from the edge of the Kalar expanse. It was faint, encoded in an old human dialect Corvin hadn't heard since childhood. He played it in private. The voice was weak, trembling, but unmistakable. Corvin, if you're hearing this, it's me, Mira, your sister. His blood turned to ice. Mira had died in the resource wars. He'd seen the colony burn. He'd buried her bracelet in the ashes. Or so he thought. The message continued. They took us. The Vorthaks. They've been experimenting on hybrids for decades. I'm alive, Corvin. Barely. But I'm here. And I'm not the only one. Zarisa found him staring at the message loop, pale and shaking. What is it? She asked. He told her everything. About his sister, the colony, the lie he'd lived with for 15 years. She listened without interruption. Then she placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we go get her. But the Vorthak's fleet is fractured, she said. Their leader is dead. Their alliance with the Obsidian Hand is broken. And now we know their secret. We strike fast, quietly. Human stealth ships, Xylosian cloaking tech, and you. Me. You know their patterns, their weaknesses. And you have something they'll never understand, hope. He looked at her. This green-skinned, white-haired alien princess who'd called him worthy, who'd fought for him, who'd offered him a home. And for the first time, Corvin didn't feel like a guard. He felt like a brother. He felt like a man with a future. Then let's go, he said. Zarisa smiled. Good, because I'm not letting you out of my sight. As the Dawn chariot prepared for launch, its engines humming beneath the repaired spires of the Celestial Spire, Corvin stood on the observation deck, watching the twin suns rise over the crystal dunes. The desert stretched endlessly, beautiful and harsh, full of secrets and scars. But so was he, and somewhere out there, in the dark between stars, his sister was waiting. He wouldn't fail her again. Not this time. The Dawn chariot slipped through the void like a shadow through smoke, its hull cloaked in Xylosian phase diffusion fields that bent light and sensors alike. Corvin sat in the co-pilot's seat beside Zarisa, his hands steady on the console, his eyes locked on the long-range scan. The Kalar expanse loomed ahead, a graveyard of dead stars and shattered planetoids. Once the cradle of the Vorthak's empire, now its tomb. Or so everyone had believed. But the distress signal had been real, and it had led them here, to a derelict research station orbiting a collapsed dwarf star, its silhouette jagged against the cosmic backdrop like a broken ribcage. They've got shielding, Zarisa murmured, adjusting the stealth harmonics. Old but functional, and life signs dozens. Mostly human genetic signatures. Some hybrid. Corvin's chest tightened. Mira. They docked silently on the station's dark side, using a maintenance airlock long forgotten by its Vorthak's caretakers. Inside, the corridors were cold, lit only by the occasional flickering emergency strip. The air smelled of antiseptic and decay. They moved like ghosts, Zoraisa with her daggers drawn, Corvin with a pulse rifle borrowed from the royal armory, his breath shallow, his heart pounding not with fear, but with desperate hope. They found the prisoners in Cryovault B7. Row after row of stasis pods, their glass frosted with age. Inside each, a person, some human, some with faint green or blue undertones in their skin, eyes closed, bodies suspended in artificial sleep. Survivors of raids, experiments, forgotten wars. And at the far end, in a pod marked Subject M17, was Mira. She looked older, thinner, her dark hair streaked with silver, but it was her. Corvin's hands trembled as he input the release sequence. The pod hissed open. Cold vapor spilled out. Mira gasped, eyes fluttering open. Confused at first, then wide with disbelief. "Corvin?" she whispered, voice raw from disuse. He dropped to his knees beside her, tears blurring his vision. "I'm here. I've got you." She reached up, touching his face like she needed proof he was real. I thought you were dead. Everyone said Thesha burned." "It did," he said, voice breaking. "But I didn't." Zoraisa stood back, giving them space, her golden eyes soft with understanding. She activated her comms. "This is Varelli's. Begin extraction. All pods are viable. Prepare medical bays for triage." As the rescue team moved in, Mira gripped Corvin's arm. "There's more." The Vorthax weren't just experimenting. They were trying to recreate royal bloodlines, splicing Xylosian DNA with human resilience. They thought they could build a new dynasty from stolen genes. Zoraisa's expression darkened. That's why they wanted the Heartstone. Not just power, legitimacy. But the horror of it was already fading in Corvin's mind, replaced by something warmer. The weight of his sister's hand in his, the sound of her breathing, alive and real. Back aboard the Dawn chariot, the rescued began to awaken. Doctors and healers worked tirelessly. Among them was a young Xylosian medic with green skin and nervous eyes, who turned out to be Lyral's granddaughter, exiled by her own family for refusing to join the Obsidian Hand. Zoraisa pardoned her on the spot, offering her a place in the royal infirmary. Mira, once recovered, proved sharp and resilient. She'd kept records, names, dates, locations of other hidden facilities. With her help, Zoraisa launched a full humanitarian campaign, not just to rescue the lost, but to give them a home. A new district was approved on Xylos Prime, the Haven Quarter, a sanctuary for hybrids, refugees, and survivors, co-governed by humans and Xylosians. Corvin didn't return to guard duty. Instead, at Zoraisa's request, and with the full backing of a reformed royal council, he became protector of the Haven, a role blending diplomacy, defense, and daily acts of quiet care. He oversaw the construction of schools, med clinics, and communal gardens where human and Xylosian children played together under twin suns. And every evening, without fail, he walked the palace gardens with Zoraisa. No titles, no guards, just them and the stars. One night, 6 months after the rescue, they stood beneath the same balcony where it had all begun. The Heartstone pulsed gently in the distance, its light now brighter than ever, fed by the planet's renewed unity. Zoraisa leaned against the railing, her white hair loose, her green skin glowing in the moonlight. "You never answered my question properly," she said. Corvin raised a brow. "Which one?" "The one about mating." He smiled, really smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "I thought I did. Every day in 100 small ways." She turned to him, stepping close. "But not with words." He took her hands in his. "Then let me say it clearly. I choose you, Zoraisa Varellis. Not because you're a princess. Not because you're ancient or powerful or beautiful, though you are all those things. But because you see me, and you never asked me to be anything other than who I am." Tears shimmered in her golden eyes. "And I choose you, Corvin of Thesha. Human, guard, brother, protector, my equal, my home." They kissed beneath the twin moons, as the desert wind whispered through the palace vines and the stars above burned steady and sure. Not long after, the wedding was held in the Moon Petal Garden. Simple, joyful, filled with laughter, music, and guests from a dozen worlds. Mira stood beside Corvin as his witness, her eyes bright with pride. Even High Elder Vorik attended, offering a rare, genuine bow. Years passed. The Haven Quarter flourished. Corvin and Zoraisa adopted 2 children, a human girl orphaned in the flare storms, and a green-skinned boy whose parents had vanished in the Vorthax raids. They raised them with stories of courage, kindness, and the belief that family wasn't blood, but choice. Corvin never wielded a plasma blade in anger again. But he taught his children how to repair engines, how to listen deeply, how to stand up for those who couldn't stand alone. And every evening, he still walked the gardens with Zarisa, sometimes holding hands, sometimes in comfortable silence, always together. The universe remained vast, chaotic, and full of danger. But in the heart of the celestial spire, in a royal palace built of moonstone and memory, love had taken root. Not as a grand spectacle, but as a quiet, daily act of choosing each other over and over again. And that, more than thrones or titles or ancient bloodlines, was the truest kind of royalty.